I apologize for the very loud fan. It's hot. Um, all right, fine. I'll put it all here. I'll put it all in one video. So there's this attempt to enclose the internet. They, right, and by that I mean capitalists basically hate the internet because the internet allows for decommodification of the economy, right? You can copy any digital good from one computer to another computer with no labor involved, with no real control uh, able to be enforced upon it. And so all of the laws of capitalism can't apply to digital goods because they're not scarce. You can't control the supply in any way, not you know majorly. And so you know, yeah, okay. There's a number of other reasons uh, why capitalists don't like the internet, but this doesn't seem to be the attitude you'll find. The attitude you'll find on the modern internet is that it's that you've got to go outside and touch grass to fight back, and all of this is just a psyop and slop or something. The billionaires, the Epstein class, they want you on your computer all day. Um, I'm not sure what's true about that, what's not true. It's kind of beyond the scope. Uh, but the point is that there's an attempt to enclose the internet, to fundamentally change what the internet is, and AI is the sort of ultimate form of this. And we'll talk about that at the end. But not too much because everyone's bored of talking about AI. So don't worry. I won't bore you with like too much stuff. Um, but I've tried to figure out, and this seems to be prevalent in like lefty spaces as well. This sort of conspiracy theory about the internet, and I've traced it back to this book called Surveillance Valley, which sort of birthed a lot of these conspiracy theories. And it seems to have, it's a very insidious book. I don't think it's like a psyop or anything. I think it's just a bad book that happened to get popular. And it got popular because the sort of crossover between people who read theory and people who know how a computer works is actually quite small. And so books like this are able to just one shot people who don't have enough technical knowledge to like push back against any of the claims that are made in this book. But I'll give you some examples of like the claims that the book makes. It's basically nothing but like insane leaps in logic, and then but like this is why it's insidious is because it's mixed in with genuine concerns and genuine claims, right? Like, there's a whole section about Prism and like the agreements between companies like Google and Facebook, the agreements they have with the US government and US intelligence to share user data and collaborate on investigations and so on, and that's all very real. It's just that we've known this since the Snowden leaks. This is not like new information or anything. This has been like widely known, right? Uh, but no, there's stuff in there and there's nothing that's like factually incorrect. It's just that the whole book is written from this sort of just asking questions um affectation, I guess, um, which is really, really annoying. So I'll give you some examples. So like sort of the central claim of the book is to go through the whole history of the development of the internet and computers, maybe even more broadly, and try to tie it all back to the military industrial complex, with the implication that like the internet as a whole is some kind of psyop that was developed by the military to determine its own people. And like the central claim is in Vietnam, the US military had to deal with insurgency warfare for the first time really, and that their idea was to develop something called counterinsurgency, where their theory was that like unlike traditional warfare, the key to counterinsurgency is like intelligence and like gathering intelligence, gathering all of this information about networks of people and whatever, and that's how you do counterinsurgency. and that Vietnam sort of taught them this, and then they turned it back on their own people using the technology they developed to fight insurgents in Vietnam, and that technology was the earliest form of the of like DARPANET, right? Um, it's a nice story. Unfortunately, it's not true. um, so the sort of actually what the claims in the book are, that's the sort of story that lefties really love, right? It goes along with a very common leftist narrative, which is that the tools of colonialism eventually get turned back on. Like colonialism is sort of like a test bed for new tools of power, which then get turned back onto the imperial core. Like this is a very common narrative in lefty circles. It's often true. It's a fairly reasonable narrative. In this case, it's a little faulty because the argument, if you actually carefully read the book, you don't even have to read it that carefully. If you just read the book, like the claim actually doesn't have much substance. It's basically just, well, the earliest forms of the internet, like DARPANET and its precursors, were invented to coordinate, these intelligence gathering operations in Vietnam and take all of that data and move it around, right? And that's kind of it. That's where the argument ends. It's like, and therefore the internet is a psyop. It's kind of like if I said, well, modern airplane technology was really developed, rapidly during World Wars One and Two, right? And so all international travel is a psyop. It's just kind of like there's a nugget of truth in there, and you're extrapolating far too much out of what is just a really small nugget of truth, right? Um, so another claim in the book, and a surprisingly large amount of time is spent on this, is on Tor, which I'm assuming everyone knows what Tor is at this point, right? The onion router. So, it's a protocol for basically preserving your anonymity online. And the claim in the book is that, well, Tor was developed by the U.S. military. Why would they just get, if it worked, why would they just give it away for free? But the book can't actually make any claims about like why it won't work, because it works, or at least as far as anyone knows who knows anything about security. Like there's possible vulnerabilities in Tor. Tor is vulnerable to a 51% attack on Tor nodes. There's issues with other sorts of de-anonymizing tactics. Anyone in the know knows about various ways that Tor users have been de-anonymized. Um, in some cases, there have been, uh, for example, there was a case on a college campus of a student who was using Tor. I don't remember what he was doing with it. I think he might have been buying drugs off of a darknet market or something on a college Wi-Fi in America, and he was caught using a time correlation attack. But we don't know if that would have held up in court because he pled guilty. Because like those time correlation attacks or you can really say. So I would explain how a time correlation attack works because it's actually going to be uh, it's going to be important for our argument, right? Um, so the way Tor works is that your connection goes out of your computer and it jumps between three different nodes, and then goes to whatever you're trying to connect to, right? Um, and so that's clever because the first node it knows who you are and it knows what the next node is, but it doesn't know anything else. The middle node only knows the node that it came from and the node where it's going, but it doesn't know anything else. And the final node only knows the node where it came from and the final website you're trying to visit, right? And so that way, there's no single node which knows both who you are and where you're trying to go, ultimately, right? Um, and so the way a time correlation attack works is by saying, well, we don't strictly speaking know, uh, who this guy is that visited the website, but we know that this guy connected to the Tor network at this time, that this guy sent a request at this specific time. And we also know that this node sent a request to this website at this same time, or like whatever, accounting for ping, right? And so it's likely that it was the same guy, right? Because the time correlates, right? You can the thing is, because it's just about what's likely, is it 100%? Who knows? Um, it hasn't really been tested in court that much. Um, but that's how a time correlation attack works. And so you can defeat a time correlation attack by having a lot of network noise. If a lot of people are using the Tor network at the same time, then any time correlation attack isn't going to work as well because you can say, well, okay, and Tor is famously slow, right? So, okay, this guy connected to a node, sent a request to this node at this time, and then this node way off in the distance sent a request to this web page at this time, but also 500 other nodes also sent other requests for other web pages because their network was really busy. So the more network noise there is, the better Tor works, right? That's why Tor was released to the public. It's pretty much common information. Anyone who understands how Tor works knows that that's why Tor was released to the public. As a random person using Tor, you are useful network noise for whatever intelligence agencies are using Tor, right? And likewise, those intelligence agencies are useful network noise for you. And everyone keeps each other private by all using the network at the same time. Um, like this is just a fact about how Tor works. And having lots of network noise is actually useful in defending against other kinds of de-anonymization attacks, which I won't talk about right now. But safe to say, the more people who use Tor and having lots of random people running Tor nodes and whatever who aren't part of the U.S. military can actually be useful even to everyone, not just the military, because of the way the network's designed, right? And so it's actually not that complicated. That took me a couple minutes to explain to you, and I'm sure many of you already knew this if you're computer savvy. Uh, it's not that complicated to answer the question, why was Tor released to the public? Now, is Tor pwned has been a question people have been asking since Tor released. People have been there are valid security concerns, privacy concerns around Tor. Like there are genuinely valid concerns, and there are certain security researchers who do believe Tor is pwned, right? None of that's in the book, right? The book just like has this dumb position of, well, if Tor really makes you private, why would the US military release it to the public? You know, okay, so I think I've explained how that book fucking sucks. Lots of people love this book though. And so this attitude, and it's again, I don't necessarily believe the book itself to be a psyop, but it's certainly a very convenient narrative because it shuts down this distinction that used to exist on the internet. We used to have um, a clear delineation between like the internet where we come from and these like corporate infiltrators that your grandma's on Facebook or whatever, right? Um, like this was always seen as a sort of corporatization, as a colonization, as something coming in from the outside, right? And this has been a narrative on the internet from internet users from the early days, from even when the internet was only really available on university campuses. That there's a narrative of people trying to come out from outside and destroy our thing, right? Especially corporations and governments trying to come in from outside and destroy our thing because it's been true since day one, right? Um, so this narrative of lumping the internet and the computer world all into one thing, that it's no longer this old narrative, which is like we used to have this decentralized, diverse, non-commercial internet, and it's been ruined by these four websites, right? Now we've forgotten that previous internet even existed, and the younger generation seems to have been be moving towards the narrative, and it's not just the younger generation; it's everyone. Actually, I shouldn't say the younger generation. Um, Everyone seems to have moved towards a narrative where uh, it's actually that is the internet. There's no distinction to be made, and it's rather that we had our lives and the internet came in and ruined it, right? Um, and yeah, so I just want to remind everyone that social media itself is is an attempt to enclose the internet. Um, and to put that in maybe more digestible terms, it's an attempt to take the internet and lock it down into a closed off walled garden ecosystem, right? By reproducing the features that the internet has, but within some walled garden ecosystem. So every feature that social media has is just something that was already on the internet that has been remade in a walled garden, right? So like instant messaging. Well, we used to have IRC and we used to have email, and actually both of those still exist, and you can use both of them. But now, we don't use IRC, which we use Discord, right? We don't use email, we use Instagram DMs or whatever, Twitter DMs, whatever the fuck, right? But DMs are not something that these companies came up with. They are like an alternative to email and IRC, which already existed back in the day, right? And then like post, like if you want to post somewhere, if you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna make a post on the internet," like usually that would be on your own website, right? Like you could just have a website to post on the internet, or you could be on a forum owned by some guy and make a post on that forum, right? So like you don't need social media to post things. When people were posting things for 20 years before social media was invented, right? Um, and then like what else does social media have? It has feeds, right? You have a feed of people you follow. Well, that's what RSS is for. That all of the problems that social media problems are real, but all the solutions that social media has are things that already were solved by the previous generation of internet users in an open way, in a way that would was not just a walled garden, right? So like oh, what if we wanted to message someone? Well, everyone has an email account, right? You need to have two email accounts. You should have an email account for robots and an email account for humans, right? You should have an email account that all of your one-time two-factor authentication codes go to, and all of your newsletters and sign-up confirmations go into your robot email account. And then you should have your email account that you use to talk to people. Because email is actually great. There's actually nothing wrong with talking to people via email. Um, Email people, talk to them via email. It's fun. Uh, no one does it. Um, because they really don't want you to do it, right? They don't want you to email them. They I'm using a lot of they, but it's very convenient for the owners of these companies if you think of DMing as something that happens on their platform rather than via a well, emails are actually in a little bit of a weird situation because it's like it's like three different protocols in a trench coat, and it's just kind of a mess of as to who owns what and the licensing of those. But it's a kind of a mess actually. And IRC isn't encrypted, so like use XMPP. You guys know what I'm talking about. Um, so yeah, there was this problem, of course, on the earlier internet, which was like, okay, well, if what if there's a blog I like? Do I have to really like just remember in my brain to go back and check this blog every like day or whatever? No, we actually figured this one out and we made something called RSS to solve this problem. Now, RSS isn't great, okay? I actually have a lot of problems with the design of RSS, but it's standard, and that's way more important than it being good. It's already standardized. It's in wide usage. There's a million billion RSS reader clients that you can find one that suits your needs. Everyone uses it, and Atom is basically they're like mostly interoperable, so it's fine. Um, so like you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so you can have a nice feed that's RSS. We figured that one out. The only thing, the thing that social media really sold itself on, right? This was the killer feature of social media was discoverability. This is the killer feature. It's the thing that keeps people on social media, and it's the thing that initially kicked off social media. We did have pretty decent solutions for this, though. Um, we had blog rolls. This is a really great system, right? If you have a blog, somewhere on your blog, you list like five other blogs that you like, right? If you're making a blog, you probably read blogs. So you'd say, these are my five favorite blogs. Go check these guys out, right? And then if all of those guys, five people, have a blog roll of their own, these are my five favorite guys. Go check these guys out. Then you know, it doesn't take that long before you've got an exponentially growing fractal of interconnected blogs, right? Um, it's not that complicated and it doesn't require very much work from each individual blog owner. In fact, it's kind of cool. It's the sort of thing you would do because it's fun, right? Rather, um, and of course, there's also the secondary thing, which is you might be writing a post and say, well, as so and so said in their blog post, and you would link to it, and then someone who's reading your blog post can find another cool website linked from your website, right? And finally, there's web rings, which is kind of like a blog roll, but everyone links to each other in one big club, right? Everyone's in a club together, and they say we are all. This website is a member of this web ring, and we're all members of this web ring, and we all have this thing together, right? It's pretty much a similar concept, except instead of linking to random people that you particularly like, you link to everyone links to each other, right, as a ring. Um, so we had pretty decent discoverability options back then. Also, search engines used to work if you knew how to use them. Like search engines have changed a lot, right? It used to be you had to learn how to use Google, right? Like you used to see your mom would go into Google and they would type it like a question, like they were talking to a human being, right? They would type a "How do I do this?" question mark, right? And it's like if you knew how to use Google, you would just be typing in keywords with like comma separations and all of the Google, you know, whatever the fuck, right? Um, and now, actually, if you use search engines like you used to use them back in the day, they give worse results. But it used to be that if you knew how to use them, search engines were actually pretty good. Now they're just ruined. So that's kind of a problem. Um, but beyond social media trying to commodify the the social aspect of the internet, the part where you make your own posts and whatever, um, we'll link to that. But the final boss of this enclosure of the internet is AI. Like just I'm sure people know this by now, so I'm gonna try and spend as little time as possible on it. But a large language, like a powerful large language model, is just a massive zip file. Okay, so like a large language model is they've taken the whole internet, they scanned the whole internet, downloaded it, and compressed the fuck out of it using a really advanced compression algorithm, right? And so, like, just like if you compress files into a zip file, right, and then you were to open that zip file in Notepad, it would read as nonsense, right? That's what an AI's weights are, right? Weights are just the compressed nonsense that you can't really understand, but it's just all of everything compressed into it's all the whole internet in one big compressed file, and that file is the AI's weights, right? Um, Now, obviously, it's weird because of the way you can like interact with it like a chatbot. That's not like normally how compression works, but it's just very advanced compression. Uh, Damn, my fan is making weird noises. I really hope it doesn't break. It's fucking still stuck with me through like 3 years of summers. Cheap Amazon fan. Let's just shake it. That exactly will go away. That actually worked. Surprising. um, So in computer science, there's a general principle. It's more like a rule of thumb, but it's mostly true, which is that you can generally exchange um, size for computational complexity, basically. Uh, a great example of this is a lookup table. So in like some old games or some older software, when compute was more limited, so like in Mario 64, for example, if there's some bit of code that needs to run all the time, like for the movement, for the way Mario moves around, right? That's going to be running every frame, presumably, because Mario's like always moving. Okay, so there's some bit of code that needs to do some vector maths of like Mario moving around. Um, it's actually if that code needs to be accessed all the time, and you have limited amount of compute resources, instead of just running that equation over and over again, right? That calculation, which is very intensive, uh, you might just run it. You might just take the time to run that equation with a bunch of different input parameters, right? Like here's all the different input parameters we expect to see at a certain resolution, right? And then you store all of the output parameters right? So it's some equation. You plug in one number, it gives you another number. You store that. Then you plug in another number, and you store this all in a big table, right? You run the equation a bunch of different times for a bunch of different options. You store all of this data in a big Excel spreadsheet, basically, a big table. And then you store that in your ROM, in your game file somewhere, right? And that way, whenever the computer has to do that calculation, instead of having to actually do the calculation, you can just say, just look up, just go in the table and see what the answer is, right? Which is much less computationally intense. It just has to find where everything is in the table instead of doing some mathematically complicated uh, algorithm, equation, whatever, right? Uh, the trade-off is obviously that table takes up more space in memory, right? So there's a general trade-off that you can do between more space in memory versus more computing power, right? And so AI is the reverse of this lookup table thing, right? Instead of having the whole internet where uh nothing is the whole internet is petabytes and petabytes of data. Instead, we can compress the whole internet down into this weird fucking compression algorithm called a large language model, right? We can compress it all down, but now instead of having a lot of web pages which each individually are not very computationally intensive but take up a lot of storage space, now we have a computer do something really computationally intensive, which is run a large language model. You've seen the RAM crisis, you've seen the GPU crisis, right? It costs a lot of compute. They need to build a gigantic data farms to hold all of the GPUs and whatever because it's so computationally intensive, right? Um, we trade off. So we take the size, we make it small, and we take the computation. It's like tilting it, right? We had something that was really big, the entire internet, but very cheap to access. It doesn't take much compute to render a web page, even a relatively complicated web page. And then we tilt it to now it takes a lot of compute, but it doesn't take up anywhere near as much size. Now it still takes up an insane amount of size, but relative to it being the entire internet, it's much less. And so the reason this is really useful to them is now someone can own the internet. Now someone can own the internet, right? It used to be this was very frustrating to them, right? It used to have so many different people that owned the internet. It was impossible to say anyone owned the internet because everyone has their own little website they run, right? But if OpenAI can host a compressed version of the entire internet on their servers and uh, you're using that instead, then if everyone's doing that, then they functionally own the entire internet. Which these AI execs they will say all sorts of things about the power of AI and how it's going to kill us all, or they'll have some very optimistic viewpoint where they say like, I think Sam Altman's current line is basically we'll all be like pets for the AI, for like AGI, right? There's going to be this AGI, it's going to run everything. We're basically not going to have any rights. We're not going to have any privacy. We're not going to have any freedom, but we'll be really, really comfortable. And like, we'll live in a technological utopia so long as you don't like want to go against the AI. And he seems to be sort of spinning this sci-fi tale. Now, here's the thing. I find that very unlikely, right? uh, I think more likely uh, either this whole thing blows over relatively soon. I'm pretty surprised they actually got this far. To be honest, I wasn't expecting it to. Um, or it's seeming like some of these rationalist guys might have been right about some of this stuff. This shit might be going wrong pretty quick. Um, Either way, whatever the outcome is, even in their utopian version of society, the AI basically controls everything and we have no rights and freedom, which is a very strange thing to say publicly, so publicly. They say it so publicly and so much. It's very odd, I feel like. I think they have some sort of psychosis, presumably from using their own products. I think being a billionaire like damages your brain worse than like getting in a car accident. Because imagine being unable to like connect to anyone because everyone's just asking you for money, or like everyone around you just wants you for your money, or they're another billionaire who is also in the situation where everyone around them is either a billionaire or just is staying around them for their money. It's like you can't really say no. Like you think about that one Elon Musk video from years ago where he's in a meeting and he tells a really unfunny joke and everyone around the table like starts laughing, and it's like because they're being paid to like that's gonna fuck you up psychologically. Like you know it, but you can't like allow yourself to know it because then you'll start becoming bad. Like there's no way that that's good for you in the long run. Anyway, that's the deal with the whole AI thing is whatever happens in the end, uh, is gonna turn out pretty well. They will say pretty much everyone knows whoever wins the AI race is gonna have an insane amount of power. Um, Now, whether they have that power because an artificial super intelligence controls everything, this seems unlikely to me. You should know that their business plan is we don't have one, but we want to make an AI so smart that it can just come up with one for us later. You know that that's their like they said that openly. I forget who said it, but one of the AI CEOs actually openly said that that's their plan of how they're going to make money. Is we don't need to come up with a way to make money because the AI will do it when we eventually make it smart. Like it's crazy. Um, it's very funny. Uh, what was I saying? Right. So whether they get superpower dictatorship because they control a god entity that can kill us all, uh, you know, much faster than that, they're going to control the entire internet, which is a very practical source of wealth and power. And it's actually, and yeah, you know, I sort of have come to believe that much of this is more of a political issue than a technological issue. I think that there are a lot of people out there who are more tech minded who think we can solve this by building an alternative software solution, right? And sometimes those alternative software solutions are genuinely great, right? Like I've seen some cool stuff being made, um, of all sorts of kinds of cool stuff. But I don't think it's I lean more on the side of this is a hard to solve political issue that isn't going to be solved through some technological innovation. In fact, it's probably not going to be solved at all, um, until it figures itself out disastrously or magnificently. Um, However, I do think it's actually not that difficult to just have a website, you know, and to follow other websites in RSS and to talk to your friends, not on Discord. The only thing is, it costs you a little bit of money to buy a VPS. And it doesn't even have to. There are so many. It costs someone money, right? Like you could, I think if you were to ask me right now, there are lots of ways to go about this. Honestly, I say use NeoCities, use Babblog, use NecoWeb. There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. I use NeoCities. Um, but I say, like if you want the optimal solution, I think the best option is to get a PubNix. Find a public access Unix system that you like, or create one for your friends. Um, and that way you have a sort of shared social thing, and you can also split the costs of web hosting and email hosting and uh, XMPP hosting or whatever, among whoever's using the service, which makes it a little cheaper and easier, which I think is kind of nice. That's what I would say to do. That's a little complicated, a little technical. You probably know someone in your friend group who has some computer skills, but you don't even need to. Just ask Claude. Just ask Claude how to do it. You may as well take advantage of their tools to help get away from their tools, right? You could probably get Claude to give you an entire fucking plan of how to set that up. I'm sure it would actually do a pretty good job of telling you how to do it. So go ahead, ask Claude. How do I set up or join a PubNix? How do I set up a PubNix for my friends or just a shared Unix system, VPS? You can figure. I'll start asking questions. Start asking it whatever the fuck you want to ask it. I know what I'm saying. Uh, it gets to the point in these videos where I just run out of stuff to say. But my point is, at the end of the day, well, I think that there are a lot of uh, well, I think that if you want my personal opinion, I think that this is the largest case of investment fraud in human history. The whole AI thing. That's it's not. People say it's a bubble. People say it's a circular economy. It's investment fraud on a scale that has never happened before in human history. Is my personal opinion. Um, but and that's a political problem that requires a political solution that doesn't seem to be coming. Um, but actually, it's relatively, not just AI, but social media and the corporate internet more generally is actually pretty easy to fight back against. You don't need to fight back. You don't need to oppose it dialectically like a Marxist. You don't need to create an alternative and sublate it. You just gotta go somewhere else. You just gotta leave and become invisible to its systems, which aren't isn't too complicated. Uh, and I hope I've done a good job of explaining how and why.